Hey guys, my name is David Arcos, and I have the pleasure of being on our pastoral team. My wife and I get to serve at the Mosaic South Pasadena community, and it's just been such a blast to do that with our beautiful kids, Aiden, who's 18, Matisse, who's 14, and Judah, who's 12. So I got a question for you today. When was the last time you felt like giving up? About 5 months ago, we were working on our backyard, and our house it's on the top of this hill, and it leads to a backyard that is also a hill. So when you move from the street to the backyard, you hit about 3 flights of stairs, and it's quite a workout. So we were paving the back, and we had to basically carry these cement pavers. They're about 150 pounds or so each, and we had about 20 of them. So I called my strongest friends, John Thomas and Daniel Hart, and we started going at it. We realized one thing really quickly: you couldn't maneuver with 2 people through the narrow opening. So it had to be like one at a time, each of us carrying our own load. And as we were going, Daniel had figured out a way to do it on our backs. And so John Thomas was behind me just in case I let go to support me, but actually all the weight was on me, and then we'd switch to him, and we would do that for him as well. And we kept doing this. And about 10 pavers in, I was done. And I was so exhausted, I needed to sit down and I needed to rest. Now, Jesus has a moment like this with people that are around him, but he's dealing with something much more profound than just physical exhaustion. He's talking about a soul rest, and he's speaking to them because they've been weighed down with guilt and shame from the laws that were put upon them. In this passage, we're talking about them being weighed down, and they were loaded to the full. And Jesus, in this passage we're about to read, helps them to move from being loaded down to being fully loaded. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, Mosaic. I want to talk to you about what it is to be fully loaded. In Matthew 11, 28 through 30, Jesus speaks to the people and he says this. He says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now Jesus looks around and he sees the people. And the people at that time, they were weighed down by the laws that were put upon them by the religious leaders around them. They were working so hard that they were exhausted. They couldn't possibly live up to what they were supposed to, but they desired to. They were devout. And he looked around and he saw them weary and burdened. They were filled with toil rather than work. And they were overloaded. And he says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." And the first thing that he tells them that is the secret is to come to me. Now, I don't know about you. I don't know if you've been to that place where you're just exhausted and you can't seem to get enough sleep. It seems like sleep doesn't cure the weariness that you carry. You feel like life has kind of kicked your teeth in it. You can't keep going. You're in such a place of discouragement that you don't have the strength of life anymore. Have you been there? This is the space that Jesus comes, and the first thing he says is, "Come to me." That seems really easy, right? Just come to Jesus. And if you're weary and burdened, he will give you rest. But I think we trick ourselves sometimes because we don't come to Jesus to find rest. We come to other things. We come to even things that are connected to Jesus. We try to find rest perhaps in our calling rather than the one who called us. Have you done that before? You try to find rest even in your purpose. And I know this because I've done it too. When I'm discouraged or I'm down, I've tried to find rest in looking at maybe the past victories or successes I've had and feel like, okay, no, this is my purpose. Or maybe I try to go back to a marker that God called me to this, or that I'm not crazy, that this is hard, but there was something that he said that gave me great courage, and I maybe go back to a marker rather than a fresh word from God that he's telling me. It's very nuanced and it's easy to miss. Or it might be something else. It might be something like when things are hard, you feel miserable about yourself. And success seems to be the only thing that'll pull you out of it. What happens when you just can't succeed? You meet with failure after failure after failure. That's the space where you just feel so discouraged. Or perhaps it's that you're so caught up in your calling or in what you feel like you're supposed to do in the world that you're serving and you're doing so much good that you don't have time to read the scriptures or ask him questions about your life. And you're hiding in the good rather than binding yourself to God. It's a very simple thing that he says, come to me, all of you who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Now, when you first look at this passage, it looks like Jesus is just saying, look, I know it's hard. I know it's heavy. If you give your burdens to me, you can relax. You can rest. You can be at rest, a soul rest. It's like there's a jacuzzi waiting for us and we should come and be part of it. But actually, if you look further, if you look at the context of what he's saying, this is not him just giving us comfort. This is Jesus recruiting. This is Jesus casting vision of what life could be. And we know this by an earlier passage that he says. There's a passage right before that, where Jesus in Matthew 11:25, he says, at that time, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you've hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. You see, in this passage, Jesus has said, you revealed these things to little children. In other words, all the people who think they know how to do this don't have a clue. He's looking at a time where the religious leaders put all these laws in place to please God. And all these people were following the experts of the law. And he's telling them, on all of this religion, they don't understand. And I revel in the fact that the Father has hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. In other words, revealed them to the common person, to the pure-hearted person who desires to do good but is exhausted from doing it. Maybe that's you. Maybe that's me at times. We're proving it, aren't we? We're performing for God and saying, I just want to be good enough. I want to prove to you that I'm grateful for this life. I want to serve and serve and serve. And I need to just, I owe you for all of this. And Jesus looks at them and all of their exhaustion. They are the little children he's talking about. And he says, there is a place where your soul can rest inside of a mission much bigger than you can imagine. He says, stop killing yourself to prove to me. Stop performing. Stop trying to earn it. It could never work like that. Everyone else around you, they don't live by the laws that they're telling you to live by. They can't do enough good. They can't live by their own standards. And so come to me. And when you've come to him, do you remember those times? You remember the moments when you first figured out that all of your wrongdoings and everything you could ever do wasn't good enough, and that Jesus just forgave you of all that, and you could give all of that sin and wrong and guilt and shame. You just took that load off and you gave it to him. Your soul found rest in him. You remember that? But then somewhere along the way, we seem to take it back on and say, okay, now that it's all forgiven, now I've got to start earning it. Now I've got to start by my own strength to live right and obey all the laws that you have for me. And that becomes weary after a while. And in verse 29, he says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. I want you to notice something. I want you to notice that the rest comes after the learning. That the rest for your souls comes after you've watched and learned from him. And it's so interesting to me that he says, I'm gentle and humble in heart. You know, Jesus, it seems like he should have said, like, I'm powerful and I'm strong and I'm the Almighty God. So you can take this and learn from me how to be powerful and strong and resilient. But he says, I am gentle and humble in heart. Isn't that peculiar? I think perhaps the reason that was important for them to hear is because they already knew he was powerful. They knew he was holy. They knew God that created everything. They were told how great he was. They understood that part. What they didn't know, that he was like them. That he was gentle and humble in heart, that he walked like them, that he smelled like them, that he dressed like them, that he was right before them, standing before them. He's gentle and he's humble. There's another passage in Hosea that describes the God that is gentle and humble. It says in Hosea chapter 11, verses 1-4, it says, when Israel was a child, I loved him. And out of Egypt, I called my son. But the more they were called, the more they went away from me. They sacrificed to the Baals and they burned incense to images. It was I who taught Ephraim to walk, taking them by the arms, but they did not realize it was I who healed them. I led them with cords of human kindness and ties of love. To them, I was like one who lifts a little child to the cheek, and I bent down to feed them. What kind of a God is this that leads us with such gentleness and such humility? What kind of a God meets us where we are in the dust on the ground and sees us lowly? What kind of a God chooses to earn our trust? He chooses to, I mean, that's absurd that God would choose to earn our trust. One thing that Jesus knew is that the people, what he had from the people was obedience, but not trust. Jesus, as God, understood that the people could obey, but that doesn't mean that that they trusted him. Didn't mean that they wanted to be with him, that they really wanted to learn from him. Have you been in that place where you've been under a leader who uses intimidation and fear? They may get you to do what they want, to fear them, but it doesn't mean that you trust them. Now, Jesus was showing them a new way. He was showing them that he, like in Hosea, he is the one who's healed them. He is the one through cords of human kindness with ties of love. He is the one who's always been there, leading you and I, bringing you to a place of love. I was thinking about my dad. My dad is one of the most gentle, humble men I've ever known. And I remember when I was small, I would go into his closet, and my dad was pristine about his shoes and his suits and everything else. We'd go into this closet, and he had everything. It was always in great order. But it was old. Like, my dad was old school. Like, he would take his shoes and he would go to a place called the shoe shop. I learned about the shoe shop because I would go with my dad and pick up the shoes. And it was the same shoes that he wore years before, and he would actually get them fixed. And they were old school and they were really cool, but they always looked so clean and so nice. They were so old. And we'd make fun of him as we became teenagers. Dad with his old shoes. But I realized something in college. When I grew older, I realized that my dad didn't actually spend any money on himself. He never bought him new stuff. All the new stuff that he had was gifts for Christmas that we'd buy him. He didn't buy himself new shoes or new suits or anything. The reason was because he spent all of his money on us. He would always make sure we had new shoes. My dad was lowly. He was humble. He was gentle. He showed me through his posture what a man was. A man of great sacrifice. I learned from my dad that you were always supposed to sacrifice for the betterment of others. Whether he was picking someone up that's homeless, or he was bringing a meal, or he'd be going to the airport to pick someone up, or he was buying us what we needed. My dad was all about sacrifice. Sacrifice is I hurt so you heal. That's what my dad lived in front of me all the years growing up. And I got a picture of what a man was from that. I think that's why Jesus says, to learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart. Jesus was showing us the God of humility and gentleness, that you could have both power and humility. You could have strength and gentleness. And that's what he was. And that's how he led us. But then, what ways has he taught you to walk? In what ways has Jesus been teaching you to walk with him? How do you learn from God? I think you have to look at the picture that he's saying about taking his yoke upon you. Well, we don't use yoke, so we don't really know, but he was talking to people who understood during that time what yokes were. Yokes were these wooden beams they would lay across two oxen, and they'd tie them in, they'd harness them in, and these two oxen would be tethered together. And two oxen could move together, they could carry heavy loads, they could plow the ground, they could do all the things that the farmer needed. Actually, the capacity of two oxen together was doubled, more than doubled, the strength that they had together. And Jesus was saying to farmers who understood that together with me, we can accomplish much greater things than you can on your own. To tether your life, to bind your life to me, and I will show you the way. This is how an ox traveled together, yoked together. And they were very clear on this. They understood what he was saying. But how do you do it? I mean, how do you learn from an invisible God? How do you figure out what it was that Jesus was saying? How do you actually flesh it out in your life? And I don't know, I've been thinking about this. How do I actually flesh this out? And I think there's like this, there's a pull. There's like a pull, a rest, a pull, an ask, a pull. I think about it in my life when I'm pulled a certain direction. You know what I'm talking about, right? Things that happen in your life and you feel the pull of God to do the right thing. And you pull and you're trying to do the right thing because you know that voice inside of you is speaking, and then you rest. And the settlement of peace that you know he's with you. And then you pull again, and then you stop and you ask, but you're not sure. And you ask of God, and you read the scriptures, and you pray, and you listen, and you're around community. You're just listening until you get a word, and then you pull again. It's this pull, rest, pull, ask, pull. This coming together. When the ox are trained, by the way, there's a stronger ox who's more seasoned, who knows what he's doing, moving to the field, and then he's put together with a younger ox that has to be in training. And as the ox goes through, the young ox learns how to rest in the strength of the bigger ox, the more experienced ox. And he's resting in his strength that he's moving forward. I think that's what God calls us to, this rest, this soul rest, not just to come to him, not just to learn, but to rest. To rest in his strength, which is the most peculiar part of this passage. See, this passage says, come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This most peculiar part of this passage is that Jesus is not taking your burdens. Jesus is not taking your burdens, and he's not giving you a lighter one. I mean, that's the reality, right? Life is not meant to be burden-free. And if you think it's meant to be burden-free, if you're sold a Christian faith that promises you won't have burdens, that you're just living some jacuzzi faith, you were sold the wrong thing. Jesus is never telling you you're not going to have burdens in your life. He's actually saying that my burden is light. It seems like a bait and switch. Seems like he's saying, come to me and I'll give you a burden. That's not what I came for, Jesus. I'm exhausted and you're giving me your burden? Now, think about it for a second. Jesus is with the people and he's looking at them, and what could be their burden? I mean, just use your imagination. Providing for themselves, for their families, for their job, having the right things in order for them to accomplish the challenges in their life. I mean, anything that you can imagine as a burden is just not that heavy to God. Think about it. Jesus was looking at them and he wasn't actually saying, here, let me take your burden. Let me yoke myself to you and carry your burden with you. That's actually not what he's saying. He's saying, no. Take my yoke upon you. Take my burden. Jesus is actually calling them to something that's much heavier. Whose burden do you think was heavier? Jesus's or the people that he was speaking to? Now, Jesus' burden is much heavier. At the very moment he spoke it, his burden was for the entire planet. This is what's crazy to me, is that the burden that Christ was offering them was entirely too much weight for them. He says, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So how can something be crushing and light at the same time? This is perplexing. I think Jesus was showing them how to rest in his strength for a greater vision. He was saying, in essence, once you learn to trust me, we're going to change the world. Now that you trust me, let's pull this world back together. Jesus was calling them to a life filled with purpose, exercising their talents and their abilities, taking them on an adventure they could not recognize. I mean, isn't that the story of the disciples? They couldn't have imagined their life before Jesus. He brought them to life. And this is what is so powerful about this passage. Jesus wasn't just coming to bring comfort. He was coming to bring a rest of the soul and a purpose that would fulfill you. And see, when we focus on the burden that Jesus carries, on the burden that God has in the world, it's both heavy and light. It seems difficult. It seems like it's in conflict with each other, but actually it's not. It's light because Christ carries us in our burden while we carry the burden of the world with him. I mean, what burden is too heavy when you're connected to the creator of the universe? The point of carrying his burden is seen in multiple ways. See, if the only thing you had to worry about with finances, for example, is providing for yourself, or maybe when you take on a family, providing for your family, well, that can be a real burden. But compare that to actually caring for the world and becoming more generous. Those are two burdens, but they're different. One way brings freedom and the other brings bondage. The bondage of worry and concern if you're going to have enough finances. That's the burden of providing just for yourself. But when you take on the burden of generosity, you don't know where the funds are going to come from, but you're concerned and you're taking on the problems of the world and you want to be a part of that and you believe that God is providing for you, because that's how it works, right? God says either you can provide for you or I can provide for you. God, when he says, I'm going to provide for you, he doesn't just provide for you, he provides for the world through you. That's generosity. And that may be a burden, but the burden is light because it's his resources moving through your life. This is the beauty of his burden and his yoke. The yoke, by the way, was designed just for you. The farmers who listened to him say that for my yoke is easy, my burden is light, knew this. They knew that the yokes that they created, these beams, were designed and fashioned just for the calves. It became oxes. And that's your purpose. That's what God has designed for you. He has a yoke just for you. He's fashioned a life. And I think the key to understanding this is that God has not fashioned that yoke. God has not crafted that life or created that purpose just for you. He's created it with you. God has every intent of walking with you to carry out the purpose he's given you. This is why it's light. Several years ago, we wanted to buy a house in LA because we were told that they're going to sell our house. And we were tenants at the time. And so we decided to go out and look for a house. And if you're in LA and you're trying to find a house, you know it's a burden. It seems almost impossible to buy a house in LA. And we moved to Eagle Rock. We lived there for 10 years. The schools were fantastic. All of our kids got into the magnet program, and we had everything that we wanted for our kids in that place. We fell in love with Eagle Rock. And unfortunately, Redfin had voted it the second best place to live in the nation, and LA Weekly had said that York Boulevard in Highland Park right next to it was the coolest street in LA. So house prices skyrocketed, and we were just in a really hard situation. It was the worst timing possible. But Carrie and I began to pray together and meditate on this passage of scripture in Proverbs 16:9. It says, we can make our plans, but the Lord determines our steps. It's very poetic. We had no idea what it meant. We wanted to find out why this word, what is this about? How does God determine our steps? And this idea of stepping or walking together with God through this. This is the perfect passage to describe what Jesus was saying when he was talking about carrying his burden. And so we were moving on. We're looking for places. We weren't finding anything of value, anything that we could imagine us living in, that we could afford. And then we had an opportunity to give to Mosaic. There's a foundation Sunday to build the foundation of Mosaic. And we were supposed to be saving at the time, but there's a pool for us. There was a pool, ask from God to give and to be generous. And so we did. We gave that money and we moved forward in our lives. And I ended up getting some outside work and got a good amount of money. We were going to put that towards buying a house. And Pastor Kim called and said there was a need in China to come with high school students. And would I go and take a team? And the cost that would took some of the funds too. And it was decided, okay, well, I'm supposed to be saving for a house, but this is a need and those students don't know Jesus and we get a chance to go and bring ministry to the world. And we're like, this doesn't make any sense, but God, it seems as if you want us to do that. So we put money towards that and we went and we saw God move and do beautiful things. But it didn't make sense on paper. You know what I'm talking about? Like every time an opportunity came, it was like, this doesn't make sense. We're supposed to be saving. We can't seem to save the money to purchase a house. And then as we moved along, we said, okay, a couple rules here. We're only going to go into a house that we absolutely love when we first see it. And sure enough, Carrie and I found this house on Tipton Way, and we prayed together in the front steps and we asked God, could this be the house, God? Could you give us this house? Because we knew it was going to be a miracle for us to have a house. So we prayed for the miracle. We put the offer in just above asking, and we prayed and our staff prayed and we didn't get the house. But we got second place. Yippee. We were so discouraged. And we thought, I don't know how this is supposed to work. We can't seem to find a place. We prayed and we gave it to God, and we just determined to continue to take his burdens on. And then a few weeks later, our realtor calls us and said, hey, they backed out. You get the house if you want it within 24 hours if you can let us know. And we were like, absolutely, we'll take it. And we got this house and it was incredible. We were so excited, but we had no idea that God was building something even more, a burden that he carried, that we carried too. And it was our daughter, Matisse. You see, Matisse had been having her own conversation with God at the time. When we prayed for the house, she was asking God for a sign that he was real. We didn't get the house, and so she thought, there it is. He's not real. And then sure enough, when we got the house, God spoke deep into her heart and said, this is me showing up for you. She came to us and just said, I'm ready to give my life to God and get baptized and give my life to Jesus. And it was just this beautiful culmination of how God's burdens and God's yoke and the things that God was doing were so much more weighty, so much more important, so much greater than what we were looking at. We just wanted her to have just a roof over her head. We were looking at destination. He was looking at destiny. Isn't that true? Isn't that what happens so much with us? We care so much about where we're going and what we're doing. And God cares about who we're becoming and how he's connecting to us. This is the burden that he carries is so much greater. And when we choose to actually take on that burden, we experience his satisfaction and his rest. See, God carried us while we carried his burden. And we learned that he determined our steps along the way. We made our plans, and he carried us, determining our steps. This rest of the soul, this is called satisfaction. It's when you take a deep breath and know what you're doing matters in the world. God provides. God gives you a pool, a rest, a pool, an ask, a pool. He pulls you into places of integrity. He wants you to walk with generosity, with courage, with sacrifice, with integrity into the world so he can create change. And he makes us fully loaded when he does it. He loads us up with all these things, and we have the choice to use them. This is the beautiful work that he does. And I don't know where you are. I don't know if you're tired of carrying the weight of your life. Tired of carrying the good works, not just the hard, wrong things, but the right things. Are you tired? You're tired of trying to prove yourself, trying to perform for God, for others, for yourself. You tired? Jesus says, come. Come to me. All of you who are weary and heavy laden, I will give you rest. Jesus wants to take all of those burdens from you and trade your life for his. If you want to make that decision today, if you're listening from wherever you are and you're ready, it starts with one simple prayer. It's just, Jesus, I give you my life. Jesus, I give you my life. Jesus, I give you my life. If you pray that prayer just now, he will come in and take residence in your life and create such beautiful change for a life filled with rest and strength and beauty. If you've made that prayer just now, I'm going to pray for you. Jesus, I pray for the person who's listening from wherever they are, that you would unwrap and unfold just a life filled with beauty and life, and that you would show them your love so they would know who you are, and they would be able to carry with you the weight of changing the entire world as you carry them through life. Jesus, thank you that you make life light, that you make life wonderful. We bless you and thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.